Alarms blared through the bridge of Boyd's command ship as it dropped out of FTL on the outskirts of the Iliani shipbuilding system. Sensors lit up with swarms of enemy contacts, over 100 capital ships, twice that in escorts and support craft, buzzing around a dozen orbital shipyards like angry hornets defending their nest. Boyd gripped the arms of his captain's chair, eyes blazing as he studied the tactical display. His fleet was outnumbered 5-1, but they had the element of surprise. Time to make it count. "All ships, fire at will. Hit those shipyards with everything we've got," Boyd barked. His fleet surged forward, pulse cannons and missiles erupting from launch tubes to slam into the nearest Iliani orbital complex. Gouts of flame burst from the shipyard's hull as its reactor went critical, the structure breaking apart into a maelstrom of debris. Iliani ships wheeled about in confusion, struggling to react. Boyd's ships dove into their midst, lashing out with pinpoint attacks on critical systems before darting away. The Iliani fired back, but their shots went wide, unable to draw a bead on the jinxing human ships and their advanced stealth designs. "Sir, new contacts. Reading over 300 enemy reinforcements jumping in on the far side of the system," Boyd's sensor officer called out. "It's Zayden," Boyd snarled. "Looks like he finally caught up to us. Harcourt, what's the status on those shipyards?" "Scans show 4 destroyed, 3 more breaking up. The rest have taken heavy damage," his tactical officer reported back. "Good enough. All ships, break off and prepare to jump to Rally Point Delta." The human ships peeled away from the orbital yards, racing back out to the system's edge. But Zayden's fleet cut them off, a wall of gleaming Iliani battleships bearing down on Boyd's forces with guns blazing. Iliani fighters swarmed from launch bays, racing to engage the humans. Boyd's flagship shuddered as a heavy railgun round punched through its armor. Damage alarms wailed. "Forward batteries out. Engine 2 not responding," an officer shouted over the din. Boyd checked the tactical readout. Most of his fleet had made it clear, jumping out to FTL. But a handful of ships were still heavily engaged, cut off from escape. His own flagship was surrounded, more enemy vessels closing in every second. They weren't going to make it out. Unless... Boyd turned to his helmsman. "Prep the stealth shuttle. Get a crew on board now." He hit the ship-wide comm. "All hands, abandon ship. Get to the escape pods." As crew scrambled to evacuate, Boyd sprinted to the shuttle bay. The sleek craft was powering up, his hand-picked team already on board. Boyd leapt into the pilot's seat, gunning the engines. The shuttle roared out of the hangar, racing away as the flagship dwindled behind them. Boyd activated the remote detonation sequence with seconds to spare. A blinding flash lit up the shuttle's rear screens. His flagship vanished in the heart of a miniature sun, the nuclear warhead in its core erupting in a hellflower of plasma and radiation. Zayden's ships, clustered in tight around it, were vaporized instantly, torn apart by the unimaginable forces. Scores more reeled away, trailing debris and atmosphere, holed and burning. Even from a distance, Boyd felt the shuttle lurch in the blast wave. Boyd sank back in his chair, letting out a shaky breath. They were alive, hurt, but alive. And they'd just crippled the Iliani war effort, destroying their biggest shipyards and a huge portion of their fleet in one fell swoop. The cost had been high, but worth it. His personal comm beeped. A priority message, source code masked, routed through a dozen QEC relays. Boyd frowned and hit accept. "Excellent work, General." The shadowy figure on the screen spoke, voice distorted. "But I'm afraid your heroics have only forestalled the inevitable. The Iliani will not stop until humanity is crushed utterly beneath their heel. And I fear we may soon see an end to your vaunted luck." The screen went dark before Boyd could respond. He stared at it, expression resolute. High command? Some Iliani scare tactic? Boyd shook his head. "No time for that now." "Get us to the rendezvous point, maximum burn," he ordered. "We need to link up with the fleet and get word back to HQ. The Iliani are going to be out for blood after this, and the colonies won't stand a chance without reinforcements." The shuttle leapt forward, racing for the FTL limit. Behind them, The burning wrecks of Eliani warships lit the void like funeral pyres, a grim omen of the carnage still to come. Boyd's shuttle docked with the battered remnants of his fleet at the rendezvous point. As he strode onto the bridge of the hastily designated flagship, his officers snapped to attention, their faces haggard but determined. "Casualty reports are still coming in, sir," his XO said grimly. "But it looks like we lost almost a third of our ships. The rest are in bad shape. We're down to less than 50% combat effectiveness across the board." Boyd nodded, his heart made. The price had been high, but they'd bought humanity a chance. Now they had to make it count. "Get me a secure link to command," he ordered. "Priority Alpha channel." Moments later, the flickering holo display drived into the lined face of Admiral Janine Havarsky, Supreme Commander of Earth's military. Her eyes widened slightly as she took in Boyd's battered appearance. "Report, General," she said curtly. "Ma'am, we hit the Eliani shipyards at Halcyon Epsilon. Destroyed or crippled over 70% of their facilities. Enemy losses estimated at over 200 capital ships, plus hundreds more support craft." Boyd paused, taking a breath. "Our own losses were significant. The Eliani caught us as we were extracting. If not for a sacrificial rearguard action, none of us would have made it out." Havarsky was silent for a long moment. "And Zayden?" "Taken care of," Boyd said flatly. "But that's not the half of it. Admiral, we need to talk. In person, off the record. I've learned something that changes everything. About the Eliani. About this whole damn war." The Admiral's eyebrows rose. "This isn't like you, Jason," she said, using his first name, a rare informality. "What the hell is going on out there?" "Do you trust me, Janine?" Boyd asked quietly. She met his gaze, searchingly. "With my life. And with the fate of our entire species, for that matter." Boyd nodded. "Then trust me when I say we have a chance to end this war. But it's going to take a leap of faith, one that goes against everything we thought we knew." Havarsky was silent for a long, tense moment. Then she nodded slowly. "All right, Jason. Against my better judgment, I'm listening. Get yourself to HQ, best possible speed, and pray to whatever gods you believe in that you're right about this." The holo winked out, and Boyd slumped back in his chair, feeling the weight of the impossible task ahead settle onto his shoulders. But beneath the exhaustion and the grief, a tiny ember of something else kindled in his chest. Something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The Eliani rebel base was a hive of activity as Boyd and Emperor Novak hurried through the crowded corridors. Eliani soldiers and technicians of all castes bustled to and fro, many nursing injuries, all with the heavy air of beings pushed to the brink of exhaustion. But there was a fierce light in their compound eyes, a determined set to their carapaced faces. These were beings who had thrown off the shackles of their parasitic overlords, who were fighting for their freedom and their very identity as a species. Boyd couldn't help but feel a grudging respect kindling, despite all the years of enmity. They entered the command center, a cavernous chamber dominated by holo displays and bustling comm stations. A group of high-ranking Eliani rebels, a mix of scientists, military officers, and political leaders, stood clustered around the main display table, arguing animatedly in their clicking, chittering language. All fell silent as Novak approached. "My friends," the Emperor said solemnly, "the time has come. Our human allies have agreed to a ceasefire. We have a chance, however slim, to break the Nizix's hold and restore our people to their own minds." A wave of excited chitters ran through the assembled rebels. One, a scarred and grizzled Eliani in the uniform of a senior fleet commander, stepped forward. He eyed Boyd warily. "And why should we trust the humans?" he asked, his voice a grating buzz. "After all the death they have dealt us?" "Because we've both been fighting the wrong enemy," Boyd said, stepping forward to meet the commander's compound glare. "The Nizix have played us against each other, letting us bleed each other dry while they pull the strings. The only way any of us survive this is together." The commander held Boyd's gaze for a long, tense moment. Then, slowly, he extended a clawed hand. "I am Fleet Commander Zyrax," he said formally. "I pledge the strength of the Free Eliani fleet to this alliance for the duration of our struggle against the Nizics." Boyd clasped the proffered claw, feeling the weight of history in the simple gesture. "General Jason Boyd, Earth Defense Forces, let's go kill some bugs." As the human and Eliani leaders began to coordinate their plans, a ragged cheer went up from the rebels. For the first time in generations, there was a chance, however slim, for peace, for victory. But even as hope kindled, the specter of the Nizics loomed over them all. Boyd knew their greatest challenge was yet to come. The desperate alliance would be tested to its breaking point and beyond in the trials ahead. For now, though, there was work to be done. Boyd rolled up his sleeves and threw himself into the planning with a will. There would be time enough later to contemplate the magnitude of the task before them, the razor's edge between salvation and annihilation, on which they now balanced. One way or another, the war was about to enter its final, decisive chapter. And Jason Boyd would be damned if he let humanity, or their newfound Eliani allies, face it alone. Boyd wasted no time in putting his audacious plan into action. He handpicked a team of the toughest, most skilled operatives from both human and Eliani forces, grizzled veterans with eyes that had seen too much mixed with young idealists burning with revolutionary fervor. At the core of the strike force were the scientists, their prototype disruptor a bulky contraption of wires and pulsing energy cores. The journey to the Nizics' prime hive pushed them to their limits. Stealth ships slipped through blockades, orbital drops onto hostile worlds, grueling marches across alien landscapes. But finally, they stood before the grotesque organic spires of the hive itself. "This is it," Boyd growled to his assembled troops. "Everything we fought for comes down to this moment. No retreat, no surrender. We end this here and now." They smashed through the outer defenses in a blitz of plasma fire and sonic charges. Nizic's shock troops swarmed from every crevice, chitinous bodies exploding in sprays of ichor. Mind-controlled Eliani drones fought with glassy-eyed purpose, forcing Boyd's soldiers to use disabling shots where possible. The strike force paid a heavy toll with each step deeper into the hive. Corridors ran slick with blood both alien and human, but inch by bloody inch they clawed their way to the central chamber. What awaited them defied description. The Nizics' queen towered above them, a bloated, pulsating mass of twisted flesh. Parasitic tendrils writhed from her form, stretching out to infest every surface of the vast chamber. The very air hummed with malevolent psychic energy. "Now!" Boyd roared. The scientists activated the disruptor. Waves of invisible force lashed out, tearing through the queen's psychic web. She shrieked, a sound that threatened to split skulls and shatter minds. Her brood convulsed, suddenly cut off from her control. Boyd and his remaining troops opened fire, pouring salvo after salvo of searing plasma into the queen's wounded bulk. Foot by foot they advanced, stepping over the bodies of fallen comrades. Victory seemed within reach when disaster struck. An Eliani commander, his compound eyes gleaming with alien malice, turned his weapon on his own allies. "For the glory of the Nizics!" he screeched. In the ensuing chaos, Boyd found himself face to face with the traitor. Time slowed to a crawl as they stared each other down, fingers tightening on triggers. With a heavy heart, Boyd fired first. The commander crumpled, but Boyd held his fire as the traitorous Eliani soldiers dropped their weapons in confusion. "The disruptor's fried," a scientist shouted over the din of battle. "We're out of power cells." Boyd's mind raced. They'd come too far to fail now. His eyes landed on the hive's pulsing power core, and a grim smile crossed his face. "Everyone out! Now! I'm going to light this place up like the 4th of July." As the wounded were dragged to safety, Boyd set to work. His fingers flew over alien control panels, routing power in ways never intended. Alarms blared as the core went critical. The race back through the hive was a blur of gunfire and screaming Nizics. Boyd's lungs burned as he sprinted, the ground shaking beneath his feet. They burst out into alien sunlight just as the first explosions rocked the hive's foundations. Boyd's ship lifted off in a storm of debris, the last of his forces barely making it aboard. Through the view screen, they watched as a chain reaction consumed the prime hive in a fireball visible from orbit. Across the stars, the Nizik's control network shattered. On 1,000 worlds, Eliani soldiers collapsed like puppets with cut strings. The Human-Eliani alliance seized the moment, mopping up the suddenly leaderless Nizik's forces. When Boyd's battered ship limped into Eliani Prime's orbit, he was greeted as a hero by both species. But even as celebrations erupted, his mind turned to the battles yet to come. Scattered Nizik's holdouts remained, desperate and dangerous. In a war room filled with human and Eliani officers, Boyd laid out his plan. "We've won the war," he said, his voice grim. "Now we finish the job. Not one Nizik's parasite left alive in this galaxy. Who's with me?" A roar of approval shook the room. The hunt was on. The hunt for the last Nizik's parasites had barely ended when Boyd found himself facing a new crisis. He stood on the bridge of the human cruiser, Dauntless, surveying the devastation wrought upon the Eliani homeworlds. Craters pockmarked continents, debris fields choked orbital lanes, and the remnants of once proud cities glowed with lingering fires. "Sir, we're receiving distress calls from multiple population centers on Zanara," reported his communications officer. "Looks like some kind of civil unrest." Boyd's fists tight. "Put it on screen." The main view screen flickered to life, showing chaotic scenes of violence. Eliani civilians fled through burning streets as armed militants seized control of critical infrastructure. The distinctive uniforms of the anti-Nizik's rebels were visible among the fleeing crowds, clearly outnumbered and outgunned. "Damn it," Boyd muttered. "Get me Emperor Novak, now!" Moments later, the Eliani leader's hologram materialized on the bridge. His compound eyes betrayed weariness and concern. "General Boyd," Novak clicked, mandibles twitching with agitation. "I assume you've seen the situation on Zanara?" Boyd nodded grimly. "It's bad. What do you need from us?" "Your help," Novak said simply. "My forces are stretched thin across a dozen worlds. If we don't contain this quickly, it could spiral into full-scale civil war." Boyd didn't hesitate. "Consider it done. I'll assemble a rapid reaction force immediately." Within hours, a joint task force of human and Eliani ships dropped out of FTL in high orbit over Zanara. Boyd stood in the troop bay of a human dropship, addressing a mixed company of human marines and Eliani soldiers. "This is a first," he said, his voice carrying over the rumble of atmospheric entry. "Never before have human boots touched Eliani soil in peace. Let's make sure we do this right." The dropship's bay doors opened with a hiss of hydraulics, revealing a hellscape below. The once gleaming arcology cities of Zanara were scarred by plasma burns and artillery impacts. Smoke rose in thick plumes from dozens of locations across the sprawling metropolis. Boyd's armored columns rolled out onto cracked roadways, pushing through hastily erected barricades. Human and Eliani infantry advanced alongside, securing vital choke points and evacuating terrified civilians. "Watch your fire!" Boyd barked into the command net as they approached the heart of the insurgent-held territory. "We're here to protect the innocent, not add to the body count." A vicious firefight erupted as they neared the central governmental complex. Insurgent snipers and heavy weapons teams rained fire down from shattered high-rises. Boyd ducked as a plasma bolt sizzled past his head, leaving a smoking crater in the pavement. "Alpha Company, flank left," he ordered. "Bravo, give me suppressing fire on those upper floors." Human artillery pieces thundered, their precision-guided shells reducing insurgent strongpoints to rubble. Eliani aircraft screamed overhead, launching surgical strikes against hardened positions. Boyd led a mixed squad of humans and Eliani into the governmental complex itself. They moved room by room, neutralizing pockets of resistance with stunning efficiency. In one chamber, they found a group of Eliani civilians cowering behind makeshift barricades. "It's okay," Boyd said, lowering his weapon and gesturing for his troops to do the same. We're here to help. You're safe now. The relief on the Ileani faces was palpable, their mandibles clicking in what Boyd now recognized as a gesture of gratitude. As the last insurgent strongholds fell, Boyd turned his attention to the aftermath. He worked tirelessly with Ileani leaders, brokering deals and offering amnesty to those willing to lay down arms. Many accepted, horrified by the toll the fighting had taken on their own people. In the war room of the newly liberated governmental complex, Boyd pored over reports and damage assessments. An Ileani aide approached, mandibles twitching nervously. General Boyd, the aide clicked, the High Council wishes to see you. Boyd followed the aide to a grand chamber where the surviving members of Zanara's government awaited. The eldest among them stepped forward, his carapace bearing the scars of countless battles. General Jason Boyd, the elder intoned in carefully practiced English, for your service to our world in its darkest hour, we bestow upon you the title of Hekrak Malok, Protector of Zanara. Boyd bowed his head, humbled by the honor. I accept this title not for myself, he said, but on behalf of every soldier, human and Ileani, who fought to free your world from tyranny. In the days that followed, Boyd threw himself into the monumental task of rebuilding. He walked the ruined streets of Zanara's cities, speaking with civilians, coordinating aid efforts, and learning more about Ileani culture with each passing day. As he watched human and Ileani work crews laboring side by side to clear rubble and repair vital systems, Boyd felt a profound sense of hope. The road ahead would be lengthy and challenging, but for the first time in generations, there was a chance for lasting peace between their species. Boyd's come. Boyd's eyes swept across the holographic display of Ileani space, dotted with flashing red markers indicating human-controlled assets. The war room hummed with activity as officers relayed status updates and coordinated troop movements. Sir, we've secured the Zeta-9 shipyards, a young lieutenant reported. Minimal resistance. Production lines are already being retooled for human designs. Boyd nodded, his teeth gritted. Good. What's the status on Kralak Nor? Before the officer could respond, alarms blared. The holomap zoomed in on a pulsing icon representing the massive orbital shipyard. Ileani security forces are mounting a counterattack, shouted the tactical officer. They've breached our perimeter defenses. Boyd's fists clenched. Patch me through to ground command. The general's voice boomed through the dropship's speakers as it plummeted through Kralak Nor's artificial atmosphere. All units, this is Boyd. We cannot lose this station. Fight with everything you've got. Plasma bolts sizzled past the cockpit view screen as the dropship weaved between towering gantries and half-built warships. Anti-aircraft fire erupted from entrenched Ileani positions, forcing the pilot into a series of stomach-churning evasive maneuvers. 30 seconds to touchdown, the pilot shouted over the din of battle. Boyd checked his assault rifle, the weight comforting in his hands. He turned to the grim-faced soldiers packed into the troop bay. Remember your training. We take this station room by room, corridor by corridor. No quarter given, no surrender accepted. The dropship slammed onto the landing pad with bone-jarring force. Boyd was first out the door, ducking low as energy weapons fire lanced overhead. His troops fanned out, laying down suppressing fire as they advanced toward the nearest airlock. Inside, the station was a maze of twisting corridors and cavernous manufacturing bays. Boyd led from the front, his enhanced combat suit's sensors painting friend or foe markers across his HUD. They pushed deeper into Ileani-held territory, the sounds of furious close-quarters combat echoing from every direction. In a vast assembly hall, Boyd's squad found themselves pinned down by heavy weapons fire from an elevated gantry. Ileani defenders poured plasma bolts and high-explosive rounds into their position, forcing the humans to huddle behind meager cover. "Jenkins, Kowalski!" Boyd barked. "Flank left! Draw their fire!" As his men executed the maneuver, Boyd shouldered his rifle and took careful aim. One by one, Ileani gunners toppled from their perches, precise shots finding gaps in their armored carapaces. With the path cleared, Boyd's forces stormed the upper levels. They fought their way to the central control hub, where panicked Eliani technicians scrambled to purge data cores and activate self-destruct sequences. "Stop!" Boyd roared, leveling his weapon at the senior Eliani officer. "One more move, and I turn this room into a slaughterhouse." The Eliani froze, compound eyes darting between Boyd and the human soldiers flooding into the command center. "You!" Boyd gestured to a trembling technician. "Deactivate the station's defensive grid now!" I cannot," the Eliani clicked, mandibles twitching in fear. "It would betray my people." Boyd's finger tightened on the trigger. "Your people lost this war the moment they allied with the Nizics. Now do as I say, or I'll find someone who will." Under the watchful eyes of human guards, the Eliani tech reluctantly complied. Krylok Nor's formidable defenses powered down, leaving it vulnerable to the human fleet waiting in high orbit. As Boyd's forces secured the station, reports flooded in of similar victories across Eliani space. Shipyards, weapons foundries, and resource-rich worlds fell to the lightning strike of humanity's war machine. But the taste of victory turned bitter in Boyd's mouth as news arrived from HFY. The mining colony, thought to be firmly under human control, erupted in violence as Eliani extremists turned on their supposed allies. Boyd watched in horror as helmet cam footage showed his troops cut down in the streets, caught in deadly crossfire from multiple directions. His field marshal, a grizzled veteran of a dozen campaigns, fell victim to a plasma grenade that vaporized half a city block. Fury coursed through Boyd's veins. He smacked his fist on the command console, startling nearby officers. "Prep the orbital strike platforms," he snarled. "I want every rebel stronghold on XOR-5 reduced to ash." "Sir," a junior officer hesitated, "there are still civilians in those areas. The collateral damage—" Boyd silenced him with a glare. The Eliani made their choice. Now they faced the consequences. From his command ship, Boyd watched dispassionately as precision-guided munitions rained down on XOR-5's surface. Entire city blocks vanished in blinding flashes, leaving nothing but smoking craters in their wake. In the months that followed, Boyd's iron fist tightened its grip on occupied Eliani worlds. Factory floors once dedicated to Eliani warships now churned out human designs under the watchful eyes of armed overseers. Eliani workers toiled in silence, acutely aware of the consequences of rebellion. Yet despite the outward appearance of control, Boyd found himself increasingly paranoid. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential assassin, every whispered conversation a plot against human rule. Reports of guerrilla attacks on isolated outposts only fueled his suspicion. In a secret briefing with his most trusted lieutenants, Boyd laid out plans for even harsher measures. "We'll increase patrols, implement curfews, and expand our intelligence network. Any Eliani caught aiding the resistance will be publicly executed as an example to others." As Boyd spoke, he failed to notice the growing unease among some of his officers. The ruthless tactics that had won them the war were starting to sit uneasily with those who had once seen themselves as liberators rather than conquerors. Outside the briefing room, heated debates raged among human colonists and military personnel. Some praised Boyd as the iron-fisted leader humanity needed to secure its future. Others whispered that his actions were pushing them down a dark path, one that could lead to a conflict far bloodier than the war they had just won. The once orderly streets of Kelrak Prime seethed with tension. Human soldiers patrolled in full combat gear, their weapons trained on shadowy alleyways and bombed-out buildings. Eliani civilians scurried past with downcast eyes, antennae twitching nervously. In a makeshift war room, General Jason Boyd pored over holographic maps dotted with red insurgent hotspots. His fist slammed onto the table, scattering data pads. "Another supply depot hit," he snarled. "How are these bugs slipping through our net?" A junior officer cleared his throat. "Sir, we've uncovered something on the industrial outskirts. You need to see this." Hours later, Boyd stood in a cavernous warehouse, surrounded by crates of Eliani plasma rifles and explosive ordnance. The air reeked of ozone and alien chemicals. "This is just the tip of the iceberg," the local garrison commander reported. "We've found similar caches across 3 sectors." Boyd's eyes narrowed. Shut it all down now. The crackdown came swiftly and brutally. Armored personnel carriers rumbled through residential districts, disgorging squads of grim-faced troops. They kicked down doors, dragging suspects from their homes. In a stark detention center, Boyd watched impassively as an Eliani prisoner writhed under the psychic assault of a conscripted telepath. The alien's compound eyes bulged, mandibles clicking in distress. "He knows something about their leadership," the human interrogator said. "A name, Vokran." Days turned to weeks as Boyd's forces scoured the occupied territories. Public executions became a grim spectacle in town squares across human-held worlds. Yet for every insurgent cell crushed, 2 more seemed to spring up in its place. Then came the security breach on Kelrak that changed everything. Boyd's command center erupted in chaos as alarms blared. "Sir!" a communications officer shouted. "We've lost contact with Convoy Epsilon!" The general's blood ran cold. Convoy Epsilon carried a shipment of antimatter warheads, planet killers capable of reducing entire continents to ash. "All available units, this is General Boyd," he barked into the command net. "I want those warheads found. Now." The hunt stretched across star systems. Boyd's elite strike teams combed through asteroid fields and derelict space stations, always one step behind their quarry. Finally, deep in the radioactive wastes of a long-abandoned Eliani military installation, they cornered their prey. Boyd watched the helmet cam feeds as his soldiers stormed the bunker complex. Eliani rebels fought with suicidal commitment, using human hostages as living shields. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "we can't breach their inner defenses without unacceptable losses. But if they arm those warheads—" Boyd's heart made. He keyed his command frec. "This is General Boyd. All ground forces, fall back to minimum safe distance. Prep orbital strike package Omega." Ignoring the protests of his staff, Boyd watched as lance after lance of coherent light stabbed down from high orbit. The entire bunker complex vanished in a blinding flash, leaving nothing but a glassy crater. In the days that followed, Boyd's inbox filled with reports of riots and terrorist bombings. Grainy footage showed furious humans and Eliani alike marching in the streets, decrying the slaughter of innocents. Amid the chaos, a masked Eliani appeared on pirate broadcasts across a dozen worlds. "I am Vokran," the figure declared, "and I bring you the truth about your so-called liberator." What followed was a damning litany of financial records, shipping manifests, and classified communiques. They painted a picture of systematic corruption and war profiteering that reached to the highest levels of the occupation government. Boyd dismissed it all as rebel propaganda, but doubt gnawed at him. He began seeing conspirators in every shadow, traitors behind every friendly face. In his private quarters, Boyd frantically erased data cores and shredded physical documents. A list of names sat on his desk, loyal officers who suddenly seemed like liabilities to be eliminated. His comm unit chimed. With trembling fingers, Boyd activated the secure channel. The stern face of Fleet Admiral Hawthorne filled the screen. "General Boyd," Hawthorne said, his voice cold, "you are hereby relieved of all duties effective immediately. Stand your forces down and prepare for a full investigation into—" Boyd cut the transmission, his mind blown. Outside his window, he could see columns of smoke rising from a dozen fires across the city. The sound of gunfire echoed in the distance. The sound of gunfire echoed in the distance as Boyd sprinted through the winding corridors of his command center. Alarms blared, red emergency lights bathing everything in an eerie glow. He shoved past panicked staff members, his mind racing. "Out of my way!" he snarled, shouldering through a group of junior officers huddled around a tactical display. Boyd burst into the hangar bay, where his personal shuttle waited. A squad of loyal troops formed a protective cordon, weapons at the ready. "Sir, we've secured your escape route," the squad leader reported, voice tense. "But we're picking up multiple incoming signatures. Fleet units closing fast." Boyd nodded curtly, striding up the shuttle's boarding ramp. Get us out of here, now! The shuttle rocketed away from the besieged command center, weaving through a hail of defensive fire. Boyd gripped his seat as the pilot executed a series of gut-wrenching, evasive maneuvers. Plot a course for the Ixar Nebula, Boyd ordered. I have associates there who owe me a favor. Hours later, Boyd stood in a dimly lit cargo bay, surrounded by a motley assortment of Eliani smugglers, black marketeers, and mercenaries. The air reeked of alien pheromones and nervous tension. Gentlemen, Boyd addressed the group, his voice cold and commanding. You've profited handsomely from our arrangement. Now it's time to repay that debt. An Eliani crime lord, his carapace adorned with intricate gang markings, clicked his mandibles in agitation. The situation has changed, human. Your power is broken. Why should we risk everything for... The alien's words cut off in a strangled gurgle as Boyd's hand shot out, fingers wrapping around its throat. Because the alternative is far worse, Boyd hissed, squeezing until the Eliani's compound eyes bulged. You're either with me or you're against me. Choose. The assembled criminals shifted uneasily, exchanging glances. One by one, they nodded their assent. Good. Boyd released his grip, letting the gasping Eliani collapse to the deck. Now let's discuss resources. Days blurred into weeks as Boyd's ragtag fleet grew. Mercenary warships, refitted smuggling vessels, and mothballed Eliani cruisers gathered in the shadows of gas giants and asteroid fields. Boyd pored over star charts, plotting his strikes with cold precision. The first attack came without warning. On New Montana, human colonists woke to the thunder of orbital bombardment. Boyd's troops swarmed the planet's surface, overwhelming the unprepared garrison. Similar scenes played out across a dozen worlds. Boyd's forces struck hard and fast, exploiting the chaos of the rushed evacuations. On Tenirak 3, Boyd stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching streams of data flow across holographic displays. The planet's antimatter refinery complex sprawled across the horizon, a tempting target. Sir, his tactical officer reported, we're encountering heavy resistance in sectors 7 through 12. Human forces have dug in among civilian population centers. Boyd's eyes narrowed. Unacceptable. We can't allow them to bog us down. He keyed the ship-wide comm. All units, this is General Boyd. Commence orbital strikes on marked grid coordinates. Maximum yield. But sir, the officer protested, the civilian casualties are regrettable but necessary, Boyd cut him off. We're fighting for the future of humanity. Execute my orders. From orbit, Boyd watched dispassionately as lances of coherent light stabbed downward. Entire city blocks vanished in blinding flashes, leaving only smoking craters. Suddenly, alarms blared across the bridge. Sir, the sensor operator shouted. Massive energy spike detected at the refinery complex. Boyd's eyes widened in realization. The antimatter warheads. Everyone, brace for... The world went white. A blinding flash engulfed the planet's surface, followed by a shockwave that rocked Boyd's ship. When the light faded, a significant portion of Tenirak 3's surface had been scoured clean. Status report, Boyd barked, pulling himself up from the deck. Sir, the planet's defenses are gone, along with most of its infrastructure. We're detecting widespread EMP effects across the entire hemisphere. Boyd nodded grimly. Then the planet is ours. Begin landing operations immediately. Secure any remaining industrial centers. As reports of the devastation on Tenirak 3 spread, Boyd knew his window of opportunity was closing. He issued a flurry of orders, redirecting his fleet deeper into uncharted space. Days later, Boyd stood in the cavernous construction bay of Caldrex Station, gazing up at the skeletal frame of a truly massive warship. Swarms of construction drones and press-ganged Eliani laborers swarmed over its hull. The SRV Sovereign, Boyd murmured, a hint of awe in his voice. She'll be the mightiest vessel this galaxy has ever seen. An aide approached, datapad in hand. Sir, we've received word that several of our allied factions are expressing concerns about recent events. Boyd waved dismissively. Let them complain. Once they see the power we wield, they'll fall in line. He turned to face the aide, eyes gleaming with barely contained madness. We're going to bring order to this chaotic galaxy, once and for all, and nothing will stand in our way. Boyd's eyes gleamed as he watched the massive form of the SRV Sovereign glide out of its construction bay. The behemoth warship dwarfed everything around it, its sleek hull filled with weapons. He clenched his fists in anticipation of the power at his fingertips. Alarms blared, shattering the moment. "Sir," an officer shouted, "multiple breaches detected. We're under attack." Boyd spun to face the tactical display. A swarm of red dots appeared, seemingly materializing out of nowhere. "Cloaked ships," he snarled. "Sound general quarters." Chaos erupted across Kaldrek's station. High-Wrath infiltrators in advanced stealth suits slipped through security checkpoints, their alien forms shimmering in and out of visibility. They moved with lethal precision, cutting down Boyd's troops before they could react. In the central data core, a team of High-Wrath operatives worked furiously to download classified files. One kept watch, his compound eyes scanning for threats. "We've got the proto-warp schematics," he clicked to his comrades. "Cyclonic torpedo data coming through now." Boyd raced through the corridors, flanked by his personal guard. He gunned down 2 High-Wrath infiltrators, their bodies dissolving into puddles of silvery liquid. "Get me to the command center," he barked. The station rocked from multiple impacts. Outside, Vakran's ships engaged Boyd's defense fleet in a desperate holding action. Eliani cruisers took hit after hit, buying time for their High-Wrath allies to complete their mission. "Sir, the intruders are pulling back," an officer reported as Boyd burst into the command center. They're heading for the High-Wrath ships." Boyd's face contorted with rage. "All ships, pursue and destroy. Don't let them escape." But it was too late. The High-Wrath vessels accelerated away, their hulls scarred and burning. Behind them, the remnants of Vakran's fleet moved to block Boyd's pursuers. "Vakran!" Boyd growled, watching the Eleni ships throw themselves into the teeth of his guns. "You treacherous insect!" One by one, the Eliani ships winked out of existence, consumed in balls of plasma. The High-Wrath ships flickered and vanished, jumping to slipstream. Boyd's fists slammed onto the command console. "Ready the Sovereign," he growled. "We hunt them down, now." Days later, the SRV Sovereign hung in orbit over a barren world, its massive form casting a shadow across the desolate landscape. Boyd stood on the bridge, watching impassively as cyclonic torpedoes rained down on a hidden High-Wrath base. The weapons bored into the planet's crust, detonating deep underground. Massive fissures split the surface, venting superheated gases and magma into the atmosphere. Within minutes, the entire continent was consumed in a firestorm. "Another Syndicate stronghold eliminated, sir," his tactical officer reported. Boyd nodded, his eyes cold. "Plot a course to the next target." The Sovereign cut a swath of destruction across the stars. High-Wrath outposts, staging areas, and criminal enterprises were wiped from existence. But still, the stolen data eluded Boyd's grasp. In a distant star system, the remnants of the High-Wrath fleet limped toward a slipstream node. Their ships were battered, their crews exhausted. "The Sovereign's closing fast," a navigator warned. "We can't outrun it." The High-Wrath leader gripped his command chair. "Make the jump." As the fleet accelerated, space itself seemed to twist and tear. But instead of the familiar slipstream tunnel, they found themselves engulfed in a maelstrom of gravitational shear. Ships broke apart, their hulls peeling away like dead skin. Crew members were sucked into the void, their screams silenced in the vacuum of space. The High-Wrath leader's eyes widened in horror as he realized the trap they'd fallen into. With his last moments, he activated an encrypted broadcast, beaming the stolen data to rival factions across the galaxy. On the bridge of the Sovereign, Boyd allowed himself a cold smile as he watched the High-Wrath fleet disintegrate. "Broadcast detected," an officer reported. "But we couldn't intercept in time." Boyd's smile vanished. It doesn't matter, he growled. They're all traitors. Every last one of them. His eyes swept across the star map, settling on a cluster of Ileani worlds. Set course for the Archilon sector. It's time to make an example. The Sovereign's engines flared to life, propelling the massive warship toward its next target. In its wake, the shattered remains of the Hyrith fleet drifted silently through the star-flecked void. The SRV Sovereign's engines flared as it accelerated away from the devastation of Tenerak 3. On the bridge, Boyd's eyes swept across tactical displays, searching for his next target. An alert chimed, drawing his attention to an incoming transmission. "Sir, we're receiving a distress call from Archilon," the communications officer reported. It's Prince Garrosh." Boyd's lip curled in contempt. "Put it through." The holographic display flickered to life, revealing the young Eliani prince. His carapace was scorched and cracked, his compound eyes dulled with exhaustion. "General Boyd," Garrosh's voice crackled with static. "I beg you to end this madness. Our people are dying by the millions. Boyd cut the transmission with a savage gesture. "Set course for Archilon. We'll crush this insect rebellion once and for all." But as the Sovereign entered the Archilon system, chaos erupted. A swarm of small, agile craft emerged from the planet's rings, pummeling Boyd's escort ships with pinpoint strikes. "What the hell is this?" Boyd snarled, gripping the command rail as the bridge rocked from a near miss. "Sir, we're detecting human energy signatures mixed with Ileani tech," the tactical officer reported. It's a coalition force." Boyd's eyes widened in disbelief as a familiar voice cut through the static of the command channel. "This is Admiral Terai Huang to all ships. Target the Sovereign's engines and weapon systems. Today, we end Boyd's reign of terror." Huang's renegade fleet burst from slipspace, catching Boyd's forces in a devastating crossfire. The bridge of the Sovereign erupted into frenzied activity as Boyd barked orders, struggling to regain control of the battle. Meanwhile, deep within the bowels of the massive warship, a human technician named Vance exchanged a silent nod with his Eliani counterpart. They input a series of commands into a jury-rigged console, bypassing fail-safes and security protocols. "For the good of the galaxy," Vance whispered, initiating the sabotage sequence. Alarms blared throughout the Sovereign as system after system began to fail. Boyd's loyal troops battled the mutineers in blood-soaked corridors, while escape pods jettisoned into the void. On Kaldrek Station, Prince Garrosh led his strike team through a maelstrom of gunfire and explosions. They fought their way to the central data vault, dispatching Boyd's elite guards with ruthless efficiency. "We're in!" Garrosh shouted over the comm as his tech specialist began downloading Boyd's secret files. "Admiral Huang, we have what we came for." But their victory was short-lived. The deck beneath their feet shuddered as Boyd's command shuttle docked with the station. The former general burst onto the scene, his face contorted with rage as he gunned down two of Garrosh's commandos. "You dare challenge me?" Boyd roared, advancing on the Ileani prince with murder in his eyes. The air filled with the scream of tortured metal as the Sovereign tore itself apart in the distance. Kaldrek's station shuddered, caught in the grip of the antimatter shockwave. In that moment of distraction, a mercenary shuttle swooped in, blasting through the station's compromised defenses. Garrosh and his surviving team were yanked aboard as Boyd's maniacal laughter echoed behind them. The shuttle accelerated away from Kaldrek's, racing to rendezvous with Huang's fleet. Through the viewport, Garrosh watched in awe and horror as the Sovereign and Kaldrek station were consumed in a cataclysm of light and fury. Boyd's final transmission crackled through the comm system, his voice dripping with venom. "This isn't over. I'll hunt down every last one of you The signal cut off abruptly as Kaldrex disappeared in a fireball that rivaled a small sun. Hours later, aboard Huang's flagship, Garrosh stood with the human admiral, surveying the aftermath of the battle. The sensor readouts painted a grim picture, entire worlds laid waste, billions dead or displaced. "Was it worth it?" Garrosh asked softly, his mandibles clicking with sorrow. Huang's weathered face was etched with lines of exhaustion and grief. "We had no choice. Boyd had to be stopped at any expense. As the remnants of their victorious but battered fleet regrouped, reports trickled in from across the sector. Rumors spread of Boyd's possible escape, whispers of fragmented loyalist cells plotting revenge. Garish's compound eyes narrowed as he watched the streams of data. "This war may be over," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of all they had endured. "But our true battle has only just begun."
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.